This webinar replay is brought to you by our technology partners, Dell, NVIDIA, and Intel. Hi, I'm Mary Poplin with Boris FX, and today we're going to talk about demystifying visual effects. All right, so let's just dive in. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this shot into this shot. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add a burn onto this talent's hand. We're going to have it slowly increase over time. We're going to make sure we add smoke and fire, and we're going to have to get rid of the tracking markers on her arm and hand. So the director has asked us to figure out how to make this shot happen. Well, when we think about shots, what we actually have to do is we have to look at what's in the shot. In this case, not a lot, but you will see that there are tracking markers on her hand and arm. Now, normally I would say that it's actually not necessary to use tracking markers when you're using Mocha, but if you'll notice, they've been really clever about shooting this so that they have some firelight flickering over her hand and arm. And that flicker, actually, Mocha will treat that a little bit like an occlusion. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we can track through it. That's why we've added tracking markers to her hand. Now, the only thing about tracking markers is once you've added them, you have to remove them. But what's a really good way to add tracking markers to skin is just a simple makeup or tattoo pen, and that's what they've used here. What's nice about that is it's a nice small area we can remove, and we're going to use Silhouette paint to remove that. We're going to use Mocha to add shapes to her hand and arm to color correct her burning over time. We're also going to use Mocha tracking to add a burn onto her hand using the insert module. Then we're going to make sure that we use particle illusion to look dev our shot, action VFX for our final VFX elements, and then we're actually going to use the Sapphire heat haze effect using S effect in Sapphire to add a warp over the top of everything and sell the shot. So here's our before and here's our after. And to get started, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Mocha track, because tracking is the foundation of all your visual effects work. So let's go to our original clip here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show you what this shot will look like when I'm done. I'm going to launch Mocha. And we've created a track on her hand. And then we've used the track on her hand to drive shapes and to drive visual effects. So to get started with Mocha from scratch, we're going to type in Mocha Pro, only spelled right, and drag and drop that right onto our clip. You can also find it right here under Effect, Boris FX Mocha, and Mocha Pro. But there's a free version inside of After Effects called Track in Boris FX Mocha. What it does is it does tracking in Roto, but it has you apply them inside of the plugin using the tracking data and the matte data and the Create AE masks and Apply Exports buttons. But we don't want to use the free version. We want to use Mocha Pro because we're going to export a silhouette tracker from this when we're done. So let's launch Mocha. And let's talk a little bit about how to track inside of Mocha Pro. So we're going to take a shape, and we're going to, in this case, we're going to take a elliptical X-spline layer. We're going to drag around our palm of our hand and those little markers. I'm going to turn my surface tool on, and I'm going to take my surface tool and put it onto one of these dots so that I can follow what the track is doing. We track luminance and auto channel in our input channels for Mocha. Usually you need to just stick to luminance. Auto channel will look at R, G, or B, and it's whichever one Mocha thinks is the most delicious. We want to track R, G, and B together, which is why we select luminance. We're going to use 50% of pixels used. That sounds a little bit low for my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to 100% so that our track is more accurate. That means we're going to find 100% of those pixels, and then we're going to use that for our track going forward. We're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. because her hand is moving in perspective, and that actually changes the algorithm. So if you need to put text or something in, translation is enough. But if you need to strap a sort of byrne texture to her hand as if it were glued to it, you're going to need to use perspective because her hand is moving in Z space. All right. So the difference between shear and perspective is this. Shear is just movement in X and Y. You could use that for squibs and logos. And then perspective is the addition of Z space to that movement. We're going to track large motion, and I will show you how to use manual track later. Small motion is for sub-pixel motion. We don't need to worry about it. And we're going to hit track forwards. Now, another thing I do want to tell you is that if you are not getting a very good track, you can troubleshoot it. So you can always increase your minimum percent of pixels used, and don't worry about smoothing level because really it puts an overall blur into everything, and you don't really need to use that for anything but extremely, extremely grainy shots. But you can increase your search area if your track is not hanging on very well. So you can increase your horizontal and vertical search areas. It will slow the track down, but it will make it more accurate. Or you can use the angle and zoom percentage. Angle goes by angle, so 45 degrees, 90 degrees, etc. And then zoom percentage means how fast is that object growing. So is it going to be 200% by the next frame? Then go ahead and increase zoom to 200%. Again, it will slow down your track, but it will make it more accurate. We're going to get to a point in this track where we're no longer going to be able to hang on because her hand will be shaking a little bit. And then she's going to rip her hand away from the fire. Well, the problem with that is once she rips her hand away from the fire, we're not going to have a very good track anymore. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to actually have to use the manual track to fix that. So here we go. All right. We weren't able to track that any longer. So let's just go back to where we are on a good track, and let's switch to manual track. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just adjust this a little bit, and then we're going to jump to our next frame, and I'm going to pull this over here. And what we'll do is we'll just adjust the shape a little bit, just like that. And then we'll go forward one more. And you can see that we no longer need to worry about that track. So on this frame, we're going to trim our layer out point to the current frame. And now we have a lovely track. Same thing for the front of the shot where we start to lose everything a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back one frame, and it seems like we can actually still track that frame. So I'm going to just track slowly in manual track backwards one at a time. 2, 3. Let's see what we get. What we're going to do is when it starts to be occluded by our little tape deck, our little tape roll, what we're going to do is we're going to then manually animate that track over time. So here we are. We're getting to where we might lose it. Oh, we lost it. Okay, so we're going to undo that tracking mark. And now we're going to undo one more. All right, let's just delete that keyframe. There we go. All right, so now we're going to just adjust this by hand, and then go one forward, adjust this by hand, go one more forward, adjust that by hand. There we go. And so what we're doing is we're creating a manual track. Just like this. All right, so now we have a lovely track that we can use to export our tracking data, to put our texture onto our hand, and to paint in Silhouette Paint. One more thing I'm going to show you really quick. We're going to call this hand track. And I can actually make a shape for the arm as well, for the color correction for the arm that we need to do eventually. And we're going to call this arm shape. And we're going to link this to hand track. And now we have both of our shapes for our color correction right there. Now because I've actually finished this track elsewhere, I'm just going to use that export. So we're going to take our hand track. We're going to turn our surface tool on. This is where our surface tool is going to be. And we're going to go to export tracking data. We're going to export as a silhouette corner pen, and this is why Mocha Pro is important. Also, Mocha for After Effects only has the clip, track, and adjust track tab. Mocha Pro has the lens module, the camera solve module, insert, mega plates, remove, stabilize, and reorient if you're working in 360 video. And Mocha Pro can export tracking data and splines as savable or copy and paste data. We're going to save this, and then we can load this into our silhouette paint. Because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to paint these markers out. So, to paint these markers out, we're going to create a silhouette paint file. And let's just open this. And normally the first time I apply a silhouette paint effect, it's exactly like you apply the Mocha Pro plugin. The only difference is it will create a new file for you and you have to save your cache files. Since that's pretty easy to do, I'm not going to go ahead and walk you through that. But what I will do is we're going to go to our roto layer. Let's go ahead and take our layer and delete all this stuff. There we go. Let's create a track to make our paint follow along with. All right, so normally with Silhouette, what I would do is if I didn't have tracking data for Mocha, I would go ahead and draw a shape around the area that I want to track. I would go to my tracker tool. Inside of my tracker tool, I would select Mocha, select my tracking parameters, make sure that minimum percent of pixels used is what I wanted, and then I would go ahead and hit track forwards. But the problem with that is that then I'd have to wait for that track to be done again. So we're just going to use the track that we made in Mocha. We're going to hit cancel on this. I'm going to delete this layer. We're going to make a new one. So we're going to draw our shape. And now in this shape, I can go into my tracker tab. I can go to point tracker and I can go to import. And then I import my Mocha hand track. And then we actually just hit the apply button and it applies it to my layer. So now we have this lovely track. And we'll just put the circle here. There we go. All right, perfect. So now when we go to our paint area, we can now go to our viewer. And in viewer, we can say, hey, this layer, I want you to use the track for, and it will pin this into the middle of the screen. So now I can paint on this as if it were a Photoshop file. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint this. Now, I'm going to go into my clone tool, and let's talk a little bit about cloning in Silhouette. We have all of our tools here, and we need to make sure that if we want our clone to follow the motion of the object, that we actually select our track under here in Transform before we start painting. Now, another cool thing about the clone tool is I can use open and close brackets, or I can use Control and click and drag to adjust my brush size, and I can use Shift and drag to change my offset. And then you can see that it's changing my offset down here, but with on-screen controls. Now we're going to go ahead and paint this just like this. And the cool thing is we're going to very quickly cover those up. Now, the thing about using the clone tool is sometimes you need to blend with the clone tool. So we have this tool called the blemish brush, and I want to talk a little bit about that. The blemish brush is a blur and grain together, and I want to use those here in my shot. So the way that we're going to handle that is we're going to have to match the grain. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my side-by-side view, and we want to make sure that the grain matches. So sometimes the grain can be too high. We're going to need to go ahead and knock it back down. Now, I actually feel like that matches pretty well. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool. We're going to make the brush size just a little bit smaller. And we're going to blend around the edges of our clone tool. And what you can see is that really hides any sins that were left in the shot. We're going to go back to our regular view. And I just want to make sure that you know that you can switch between our channels to match the grain. So just make sure that you switch between the channels to match the grain with the blemish tool, and you will get a really nice grain and blur match. Okay, so the other thing that I want to talk about a little bit with the clone tool is that we actually paint on normal color and detail. So let's talk about what that means. If you look here at the color layer, you can see that I can actually just clone in color alone, okay? And if we go to detail, and let's go to our detail layer, you can see that you can actually clone in detail. And what this will do is sometimes this gives you just a lot more control over the paint that you're creating. So we want to make sure that when we are using these tools, that we're using the right tools. When you're doing beauty work, the color and detail channels are super, super useful. Okay, let's go back to our output. And what we can do is we can actually use auto paint now to paint this. So I'm going to actually go ahead and make sure that we get rid of the paint on the arm really quick, because we don't want to have the paint on the arm when we are tracking to the hand. But now we're going to take our paint state. We're going to select all of this. We're going to say match move, and I'm going to say, hey, I want you to auto paint this moving along with the track from the current frame to the end frame, and we're going to hit paint forwards. And what you can see is that the silhouette will paint this as if it were a still image. So you don't have to repeat your brush strokes. Silhouette does it for you based on the track. Now, when you get back here to the blurry areas where our track is not as good, and also where there's a lot more occlusions, you will have to come in and paint these sections frame by frame. And we can do that really easy with the blemish tool. So we can just come in here and increase the size of our blemish tool and just really knock that stuff out. Or we can actually use a combination of the clone and just offset this paint and then blend it together. And the nice thing about this is we can then just go ahead and take some of these tools and then track. We don't even have to track them. We can just paint this frame by frame. Because it's so blurry, we will totally get away with it. Now, if we go ahead and take our active layer and we unstabilize, what we'll do is you'll see our paint moves along with our shot just perfectly. All right, so this is how you end up getting a really nice paint inside of Silhouette. And then you can render this out. And you can render it back by saying, hey, go ahead and render this right back to the timeline inside of your plugin. But in this case, we've actually just baked that cake for you and rendered the shot out for you. So here's what our paint ends up looking like when we're done. And you can see that that looks really nice and seamless. All right, so now we actually have to add the burn texture. And so what I've done is I've taken my original movie, duplicated the layer, and just kept my Mocha Pro shot on it. We want to talk about making an insert for this. I'm just going to really double click this skin texture so you can see what we added. We made this skin texture. It's basically a combination of stucco texture and sunburn. And we're going to apply this to her hand to sort of give her that gross, crunchy, I'm burning my hand look. And we've made it super saturated because we're going to take the opacity down a lot. So we want to make sure that we keep some of that detail. So on our burn texture, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure under our Mocha Pro module, under Insert Layer, we're going to select Burned Skin Texture from our layer pile. Now, once we've done that, we can go ahead and launch Mocha. And inside of Mocha, we can apply the insert layer right here under the insert clip. So select Insert Layer, and now we can add this to our hand. Now, this track is already done, but I do want to point out a couple of things to you. We've actually added some feather to this shape. What we did is we used the Uber key. And the Uber key, we can actually, under Edge Properties, we can add a feather. And you can see that that will actually change across the entire timeline because we're using the Uber key. Think of the Uber key as a ripple offset. But the takeaway that I want you to take from this insert module is that you can jump over here to the insert module. You can render this with motion blur. You can use the matte for the insert layer to make sure that you are applying the burn only to the palm of her hand. And we can go under here to the warp tool and we can say, hey, let's use a mesh level 2 and show our mesh. And we can actually change and warp this so that it feels a little bit more 3D on her hand. The cool thing about the insert tool and the mesh warp tool is you can use this and animate it over time. So if you've got a logo that's warping over time, you can use this to match that logo over time on a shirt or whatever. We're going to go ahead and save and close this. And we're going to render this back to the timeline. So we're going to say, check the render checkbox, insert, cutout. All right, and now when we apply this back to our hand, it's applied in our shot. But the only thing is, I've had to come in here and we've animated the opacity over time. So Mocha is creating the motion blur and Mocha is creating the hand warp, but we're going to actually animate the opacity in our host. Right now it's 0, and then I'm never going to make it heavier than 15% because we just don't want to add too much of the burn because it'll start to look a little bit goofy. And as you may know, burns don't really get really gross and nasty until they've had time to get away from the fire. If you burn your hand, that burn doesn't really puff up until about 15 minutes later. So now, unless your hand is actually inside of fire, in which case, obviously, you're going to see some much more outrageous texture. Okay, so the second thing we're going to do is we're going to take these Mocha shapes and we're going to export the hand track and the wrist shape right here. And we are going to export this shape data and we can copy it to the clipboard or we can apply it. And what we'll do is we can apply this to an adjustment layer. So I've added an adjustment layer with some Lumetri color and we went to Edit, Paste Mocha Mask, and applied these masks. So you can see we have a mask here and a mask here. I've added about 100 pixels of feathering, and we're going to just go in here and change the temperature, the exposure, the contrast, shadows. And what we're going to do is we're going to, just like we did with our texture insert, we're going to animate this over time to about 40, 45, or 46 opacity. So let's go ahead and turn that on so you can see what it's doing. You can see that it's darkening this and saturating it over time. It's subtle, but it really, really is something that sells the effect that her hand is burning over time. Now, the next thing I want to talk a bit about is particle illusion. So particle illusion is a very cool tool. What it does is it allows you to sort of look dev different effects right in your host. So this works in Avid, it works in Premiere, it works in After Effects, whatever. And the nice thing about this is that it can help you sell the effect to the director, to the visual effects team. It can help you decide what you want. I think of this as a look dev tool and a finalizing tool because you can always use these for motion graphics. You can use them for final effects because they actually do look really good. But sometimes you want to just look dev, and that's what we're going to do using the particle illusion tools. So let's go ahead and open some particle illusion. And we're going to launch it, and it launches just like any other plugin that we have. It launches as a separate window, and you can start to use this to figure out how you want to style your shot. This is really valuable because you can actually do this in real time with the director. You can search your emitters, and you actually have this interactive window here where you can place your fire or add a train of fire or, show it going from right to left, and you can sort of figure out how you want this to be applied to your shot. What's cool also about this is that you can view this over your video. So you can view this over your source video and see how it's going to look. And you can also see what objects you need to interact with over time. The emitters work like any other particle emitter. You have your shapes, you have your position, you have your velocity, your number, your the life of the particle. You can also pre-run your particles, so frames to preload. So if you don't want your particles to, appear over time from the beginning of the shot to the end, you can actually have them just, already be pre-baked. And load that into your shot as well. It's a really, really useful tool, and you can simply, when you're done, apply it back to your timeline, and it will render onto whatever layer you've used. In this case, I've used an adjustment layer. Another cool thing that I think you really should know about is we can also use some new tools that are available inside the newest version of Particle Illusion, which is Force. So we've added forces to your particles. And what forces do is forces interact with the particles. So you can take your force and you can, increase your strength, the radius, the position. And what this will do is this will start to bend particles around it. And I've also used a deflector here for her hand to go ahead and deflect the smoke around her hand so that it's not going straight up. All right, so when we hit apply, what you'll see here is we have this nice smoke going around her hand. So let's just play that for a few frames so you can see. You can see the smoke is moving around her hand. I can also sweeten particle illusion with things like motes to add dust and stuff coming out of the fire, or sparks, depending on what the look calls for. Once I've finalized the shot with the director, I can actually go ahead and start to find the effects that fit properly. Now, we are using Action VFX because our friends over at Action VFX have literally just hundreds and hundreds of videos of fire and smoke and explosions and, blood splatters and all kinds of fun, gory stuff. We're going to just use fire, and we're also going to use smoke from Action VFX. But you can browse their website and find whatever you want. Once you have a good idea of what you're looking for, you can search on their site and get anything you like. I went with a shot called Ground Fire Front Angle and Small Rising Smoke. Okay. Now, the thing about smoke that you should know, let's just go ahead and put this on normal so you can see, is that smoke generally comes as an alpha layer. So what you'll end up with is something that's white over black. White is going to be your, the most opaque, right? And black is going to be fully transparent. So with smoke, you end up with this white smoke over black background. You can use this as a Luma mat if you like for a solid, or you can use this however you like. In this case, I'm going to invert it. Okay, so I get some darker smoke. I'm going to add some levels to just increase the darkness of the smoke. I'm going to add a little bit of a blur because it's kind of in the foreground and it looked weird too sharp, and we're going to just multiply this back over the top. And we're going to end up with some nice black greasy smoke that's coming from the tape as it burns, okay? And that's how we're going to get that fire and smoke effect. Particles are wonderful and I love them, but filmed fire is also just really hard to beat. So this is our fire effect and our smoke effect. And you can see on our fire, we've actually just made a really quick mask to make sure it stays in the location of the barrel that she's burning everything in. Now, the last thing that I kind of want to talk to you about is the Sapphire S Effect Heat Haze. So in order to just sweeten this shot, let me zoom in so you can see what this is doing. In order to just sweeten this shot, we're going to add a heat haze over the top of this. And here's what that does. The heat haze will ripple effect the pixels that I am working with over the hand. And I want that effect because that really sells that her hand is over something super hot. Now, the cool thing about the S Effect tools is S Effect is actually something that combines all of the Sapphire tools. So if we go to Effect and we go to, let's do S Builder, Sapphire Builder, we're going to select S Effect. You can also do it for transitions, but we're going to do it for effects. Inside of S Effect, you can actually load just thousands of professionally made presets using all of our tools combined into a node tree. Now, we can actually just type in heat haze, and I actually already have a heat haze effect. The only thing is, I'm not 100% wild about how this heat haze has a glow in it. But that's okay. What I do want is the warping effect that comes with the heat haze. So we're going to go ahead and double click this to apply it. And you can see that the glow is really pretty extreme. That's okay. We can fix that. We're going to go to Edit Effect. And inside of Edit Effect, I can just click on my node graph that defines what this effect is doing. And we have a source, distort, we have a mask and a ripple. We're just going to go ahead and delete that glow. So now we have everything in the effect except for the glow. And what's also cool about this is I can decide what gets populated back into my effect. So if you'll look over here, we have checkboxes, and these checkboxes actually allow us to keep those sliders in the S Effect when we pass this off. These can all be saved as a preset onto a network, and if you're sharing these with other team members, you don't want to just make them glaze over with just 1,000 options. So we're going to keep the important ones like frequency and boil details and things like amount and blur, and we're going to hit OK. And now it will apply that effect into my shot, and I can start to change these effects. So we can go to like, hey, increase the frequency, go ahead and increase the details. Maybe we'll decrease the details actually a little bit. We're going to go ahead and see how that looks. Here we are. All right, so now we can add this effect to our shot. I actually like my original effect, so we're going to go ahead and show you what that looks like when we're done. And just as we did with our fire, we just added a really quick and dirty mask instead of After Effects to localize the heat haze. So here's our before, and let's just go ahead and play that. And here's our after. And you can see that that burn is appearing on her hand over time. Our smoke and fire is added in, and it looks very lovely. So just to recap, we painted out all of the markers on her hand. We added a texture onto her hand to create a burn. We added mocha shapes on top of that are also driven by the mocha track, just like the paint and the insert is. And we added that over the top to add some color correction and make it appear like her hand is getting more burned. We added in some smoke and fire. We looked at that with particle illusion and then did our final effects with Action VFX pre-recorded fire and smoke. And then we added a Sapphire S effect heat haze over the top to sweeten everything and sell it all together. And that is how you create invisible VFX. It's really not that mysterious. But I cannot stress enough how much a good track makes a difference. So because we used Mocha tracking, we are able to lock everything down. And locking all those details down allows us to make everything completely invisible. The silhouette paint tools allow us to make invisible paintwork. And then, of course, the Sapphire tools sweeten everything. And particle illusion is just completely invaluable for telling your story with a director. If you have any questions, you can find us online at www.borisfx.com, where you can find us on our forums, you can find tutorials, and you can download free trials of our software. We know everyone is struggling right now, so go ahead and use that discount code and work from home.